So again, thank you for your time. If I could have all the panelists just go ahead and introduce themselves and then we can get started. This is going to be a relatively informal discussion, just talking more about, your experiences with animal law, criminal law, the intersection of it, any advice you have for law students and kind of where you see the field going in the future in the next few years. So Jacob, if you don't mind starting, we can work our way down.
Sure thing. My name is Jake Kamens. I am a senior assistant attorney general at the Oregon Department of Justice. I started in that position at the beginning of this year. My other subtitle is Animal Cruelty Resource Prosecutor. And for the past decade, I have been working as the statewide animal cruelty deputy district attorney in the state of Oregon. The difference between my previous position and this one is that previously I was working as a contractor for a district attorney's office in Corvallis. And this past year, the Oregon State Legislature got its act together and created some money in the budget for this position. Before this year, the position was being funded largely by a grant from the Animal Legal Defense Fund. But after 10 years of proving that the position worked and seeing other states moving ahead of us in terms of putting this kind of position in their state government, Oregon went ahead and did that. So I graduated from law school in 2009 from Lewis and Clark, and I live in Portland, Oregon with my 2 kids, my wife, who is a judge on the Oregon Court of Appeals, and 2 cats and some various saltwater fish.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Professor Leugman, if you could go next.
Sure. I'm Josh Leugman. I'm Professor Leugman to the extent that I'm adjunct faculty at GW, where I teach a course on crimes against animals. That arises largely out of my previous job, which was as an assistant district attorney up in Bronx County, New York, where I personally prosecuted most of the animal cruelty prosecutions and oversaw all of them in terms of trial strategy, plea offers, and anything to that effect. Currently, I'm a trial attorney at the Department of Justice, which means I have to say that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Department of Justice or the U.S. government at all. I'm just speaking in my own personal capacity. I guess I'll add, no one told me that I had to do this part, but I'll add that I'm also not speaking on behalf of the Bronx DA's office, where I no longer am. But yeah, other than that, that's my main background. I have no saltwater fish, but I do have a dog, 2 kids, and my wife, who's currently general counsel for an animal nonprofit.
Great. Thank you so much. And Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I'm a staff attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund's criminal justice program. So seeing Jake, it's like kind of seeing a neighbor. We do a lot of work with him. And I'm also located in Portland, Oregon. I focus within criminal justice. I focus on trauma-informed approaches to ending cruelty and finding ways to resolve the underlying causes of cruelty for people who commit those acts, to really help heal them and prevent the animal abuse cycle from occurring. I also focus on work and collaborative efforts with Indigenous nations as well as the U.S. territories. Since we're given the spiel of companion beings, I live with my partner, and we have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and we don't always rule the roost. So. And that's it. Oh, and I also teach at University of Pittsburgh.
Great. Okay, so we do have 3 professors on this call. That's amazing. I guess I'd want to start. I know you all gave a little bit of background on your career paths and kind of what brought you here, but I'd like to know really what specifically sparked your interest in animal law, given that it's a pretty niche field, and I think a lot of law students don't even know about the wide variety of opportunities. So kind of what that moment was, if there was a specific moment, and kind of how that brought you to where you are today.
I can go. So I actually, if you want the far back history, I used to volunteer at Best Friends in Salt Lake. And I remember I wanted to go to law school for human rights, and the volunteer coordinator at Best Friends said she was so happy I was going to law school because we really needed animal defenders. And I laughed, thinking, like, I'm not going to law school for animal law. And then I had this moment where I knew I was going to laugh at myself later if anybody has had those similar experiences. So I went to law school. It kind of felt like the universe guided me in the to the law school that I didn't anticipate going to, but was the perfect one to get into animal law for me. And I was all set to do the civil rights law clinic at the university. And then I saw the director of the animal welfare clinic present, and I had tears in my eyes, and I never looked back. I knew that was the one for me. It just kind of hit my soul. And then I did the clinic, and then did the clinic a second year, and I just started applying to different nonprofits and started getting acceptances for them, whether they were clerkships or internships. And then I kind of had an idea that I was going to do Lewis and Clark's animal law LLM, and that it would get me into the right direction. And so I did that and wound up meeting David Rosengard, who took an interest in my capstone project that's no longer required for the LLM. And then because it was a new approach, or a different approach to criminal law that CJP wanted to move forward with. And so that actually helped me get my job. And it's been a really great fit.
I'll jump in here. I had to be quick on the draw there. I will also echo Professor Leugman's disclaimer, but about the Oregon Department of Justice. Anything I say here should only be imputed to me. When I was in law school, I was not particularly interested in anything other than making sure that I was going to be a courtroom lawyer. I wanted to be making fancy speeches and doing closing arguments, whether that be defense or prosecution. And I ended up getting an internship and then an externship at the Clackamas County District Attorney's Office. That's a county here in Oregon. Doing that work cemented my desire to be in court, and doing law school cemented my desire not to be writing as much anymore. So when I graduated, I looked for jobs with prosecution side opportunities, and I started working at the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, which is the district attorney here in Portland and some of the surrounding cities. While I was at the DA's office, there was a policy by which certain cases, when they were assigned to misdemeanor attorneys, would be specially assigned to individual deputy DAs. And these were typically cases that had either a particularly complex fact pattern, some particularly specialized witnesses, or media attention. And animal cruelty cases always hit the trifecta on those. So for whatever reason, I ended up getting specially assigned more than my share of animal cruelty cases. It wasn't anything that I had really considered before. But as I went through and prosecuted these cases, it became clear to me that there was a real need for specialization in the prosecution arena. This was, over a decade ago. And when you got cases in from, be it from local animal services, or even when police officers would investigate animal cruelty offenses, it was clear that there was a gap between the legal system and the people that were investigating and charging these crimes. So I kept working on them. I got one particularly high-profile case, State versus Hess, which ended up being the case that cemented in Oregon law that animals are individualized victims for the purpose of our neglect statute. And ALDF, for my efforts, ended up giving me, naming me one of the top 10 animal defenders for that year. Then this position came open. This is a long story. The position that I was in previous to this came open through the efforts of Animal Legal Defense Fund, the Oregon District Attorneys Association, and the Benton County District Attorney's Office. I had been at the DA's office at that point for about 4 years, and feeling the pull of specialization, I applied for it. and I did that for a decade. And then I went to the legislature last year and basically created this position, which I then applied for. And here I am. And I guess I should say that I didn't take advantage of the wonderful animal law resources that are at Lewis and Clark when I was there. I do now teach as an adjunct professor crimes against animals, but it just really goes to show that what you do, what you think you might end up doing at the beginning of your law career, and what you end up doing can be very different in a lot of ways.
I think it's appropriate that I go third here because my story is slightly different, maybe less interesting, because I went to law school solely for the purpose of being a prosecutor, and that included, it was not exclusively for the purpose of prosecuting animal cruelty offenses, but it did include that. So and I was so serious about that I wrote my personal statement for law school about a case. I grew up in New Jersey, about a case in New Jersey where in the middle of the night, 3 teenagers had broken into an animal sanctuary and bludgeoned multiple animals to death, and said, this has inspired me to go to law school and be a prosecutor and prosecute these kinds of offenses. So I devoted all of my law school tenure to getting any kind of prosecution internship, which sometimes involved a little bit of working on animal cruelty cases alongside prosecutors, but most of the time did not. And then when I got to the district attorney's office, in the Bronx, there's a specialized bureau that handles a wide range of offenses, including all of the animal cruelty cases. It just so happens that not a lot of prosecutors are particularly interested in handling those kinds of cases for a variety of reasons. It also just so happens to be the case that that bureau also handled child pornography offenses, which further reduced the number of ADAs interested in prosecuting those 2 types of offenses. And this is among a variety of other less controversial, so to speak, subject matters of cases. So I I came in there immediately expressing my interest in prosecuting the animal cruelty cases. At the time when I started there was no one who was really responsible for overseeing those offenses. They were just handed out randomly among ADAs within the bureau. And then over time, as I developed an expertise and continued expressing an interest in these cases, I was given this role of being the point person overseeing these offenses. And New York's a little different in that in New York City, the NYPD actually has a designated animal cruelty detective bureau. So I was able to, everything kind of came in through them. I mean, we have all kinds of benefits that or I shouldn't say we, I'm not there anymore, but I think New York is unique in a lot of ways in that it has the ASPCA there, so can automatically rely on the forensic veterinarians there. There's a designated system within NYPD, so even if a regular precinct officer was called to an initial animal cruelty offense, they would then contact the detective bureau, assuming further investigation was needed, that handled all the animal cruelty offenses. And then that animal would automatically, even if they received emergency veterinary care somewhere else, be transferred to ASPCA for forensic purposes. And so that meant that I had this channel wherein either ASPCA or NYPD had a direct contact with me. So I was able to ultimately be responsible for delegating and overseeing those cases.
That is really fascinating, and it's good to hear kind of the breadth and depth of different opportunities. It sounds like a lot of it was focused on, district attorney's office, Department of Justice, kind of prosecuting animal crimes, but Jessica seems to have done some good work in policy as well. So I guess that kind of turns to my next question of what do you think is the biggest kind of growing issue in this field, specifically, the intersection of animal law and criminal law, and, are there specific initiatives that you are you think are pivotal to this movement that maybe haven't been fully completed yet?
So,
Yeah, you go ahead. You take this one.
I mean, I'll tread lightly here. I think, you know, um, there's sort of evolving views or maybe revolving views as to what's appropriate in how the criminal justice system handles things. And I don't think I should say I don't think animal cruelty offenses are excluded from that. And there's been some specific focus on animal cruelty offenses. At the same time, there's been a lot of, or maybe not a lot of, but there has definitely been talk about enhancing animal cruelty penalties and treating animal cruelty offenses more seriously. Uh, Speaking from the New York example, since I had experience there, the New York animal cruelty offenses are housed within the agriculture and markets law. So they're not even part of the penal law, which already sort of diminishes the severity of the offense, even if it's a felony offense. And the felony offense in some ways is the weakest felony offense of any felony offense in the state of New York. So there are vehicle and traffic violations. For example, there's something called, it's called a 511. It's statute 511 of the penal law in New York, which applies to driving with a suspended license. So to driving with a suspended license offense, a felony offense for that, which is driving with a certain number of suspensions on a certain number of separate occasions, is dealt more harshly or dealt with more harshly than animal cruelty offenses. It's done to such a degree that if you looked at the animal cruelty felony offense in the state of New York, it has a specific prescribed penalty, a maximum statutory penalty, which is lower than any felony offense in the penal law. So it's not only the lowest class of felony offenses, but it then also has the weakest sentence. And not to get too New York specific, but there's something in New York, and I know a lot of states have something similar to this, called predicate felony offenses. So you have a predicate felon, which would be a repeat criminal defendant who's already been convicted of felony offenses within a certain amount of time and now has another felony offense. Because the animal cruelty offense is housed within the agriculture and markets law and is outside of the penal law, it wouldn't count for predicate felony sentencing. There's a whole host of things I could talk about with this and specific to this statute, but the main point to take away is that I think even when these things get increased attention, and even setting aside, you know, do you have a good sentencing judge? Do you have good juries for these kinds of cases? Even if everything goes exactly your way, you're still dealing with animal cruelty offenses being treated as sort of the bottom in terms of severity. And then the only other thing that I would say, because I'm not going to take up all the time here, because I could answer this question for the rest of the panel time. But there are statutes, state statutes throughout the United States that sort of treat classes of animals differently. So rather than looking at the conduct, the underlying conduct of the offense, it looks at conduct plus type of animals. So farmed animals would be the most frequent example. They're either explicitly excluded from statutes, or some states have separate designated statutes for farmed animals. But you also have something like it, for example, in New York, if you look at the legislative intent when they passed their felony animal cruelty law, they cite examples of the torture of wildlife, specific cases, right? So, you know, and I can't even remember what the specific cases are, but someone set this turtle on fire. But if you look at the statute that was passed after looking at this underlying legislative intent, it applies only to companion animals, right? And companion animals are defined as non-wildlife, among other things. So I think there's a disconnect in terms of a lot of the prosecutorial approach when prosecutors bring these cases and which types of cases they're bringing based on what species the animal victim is. And then there's also the statutory issue as well.
I think I'm going to echo a lot of what Professor Leugman said. I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle, though, because I understand that there's a large conversation that's happening in our country about criminal justice on a macro level, about the use of criminal justice and the use of certain kinds of punishments. But what I'm concerned with, and this is in the context of, I'm prosecuting animal cruelty in Oregon, which was just named #1 by the Animal Legal Defense Fund in terms of their state animal protection laws. We also have a situation where our highest animal cruelty felony, the most serious crime you can commit against an animal, is a Class C felony, which is the lowest level of felony that we have in our system. Well, the way I'm going to come at it differently is when you talk about alternative approaches to criminal behavior, mental health treatment, probation terms, things of that nature, these avenues just aren't funded. There is very little in the way of mental health treatment available for people who commit even crimes against humans, let alone crimes against animals. And when we have statutes that are on the lower end, and you are saying we want to go the step further, and we want to put people, keep people in the community, keep people in society, and try to rehabilitate them that way, it's really important that they actually have something that they can do. And I don't know what your experience is with this, but I try to find like classes for people to take. I try to find mental health opportunities for people to be evaluated and to get treatment. And for some reason, there's a real distaste and a lack of resources for providing rehabilitative procedures for people involved in animal cruelty. One exception is the Benchmark Animal Rehabilitative Curriculum, which is a nonprofit organization that offers sort of like the version of the traffic class that you might be sentenced to if you run a red light and they catch you on camera. Not that I'm saying that's ever happened to me. But it's more of an overview of why you should treat animals, in a decent manner, and why certain behaviors would be dangerous and inhumane. Even that, which I recommend regularly, both to sentencing judges and in plea bargain documents, is more of a generalized overview. It's not one-on-one. It's not going to definitely address any kind of underlying mental health issues or issues related to resource management that people might have. And I really think that society sort of writ large needs to get serious as to whether it thinks that animal cruelty should be dealt with in a way that's going to actually stop people from reoffending. Even in Oregon, with our great ALDF ranking, the maximum amount of time that a person can be prohibited from possession of animals under the law is 15 years. So if I have a 20-year-old defendant or a 25-year-old defendant, that person is guaranteed to be free and clear of any restrictions on their ability to possess animals within their lifetime. And if we don't actually attack those issues in a productive way through treatment and rehabilitation, we're just going to have heartbreak after heartbreak, I think.
Building off of what Jake said, I completely agree. And also what Professor Leugman said, there's this balance between heightening the understanding about how serious animal cruelty and offenses against animals is, but also not saying like, I'm going to stick you in jail and like having incarceration as the only option, but really finding a way to address the root of the problem through rehabilitative measures. So the ones that Jake had mentioned, and different alternative sentencing, which could go into humane education or community service. But those options really need to be tailored for the individual. And it seems like courts don't always have the time to do that or the interest, as Jake had mentioned. Interestingly, Washington does have in its animal cruelty legislation that if somebody commits animal cruelty, the judge can order a psychological evaluation and humane education. So you are able to put different provisions into your legislation to encourage those options. But they need to be effective, and they need to also actually like accurately address what's happening. And to that effect, a lot of the work we're seeing within the criminal justice program isn't just working with courts. We do a lot of trainings with law enforcement and animal control officers and judges, trying to educate them on these different options, showing the severity of animal cruelty, the way it is connected to other types of crimes, and also violence against humans and family and other dependents. But you can only do so much with that when there isn't enough funding for judges to like assign diversion programs if states haven't supported diversion programs, etc. So what I've recognized in a lot of my work is it's becoming a lot of collaborative outreach with communities, especially with Indigenous nations and U.S. territories, where a lot of what's considered cruelty is actually like the lack of resources for everyone. We get a lot of calls about reported animal cruelty for members of Indigenous nations. And the first question I ask is like, how are the humans living in those circumstances? What situations are they finding themselves in? Is it like many other reservations where you're dealing with medical and veterinary deserts or food deserts? And is there a quality of life issue for the human dependents that are also involved? And so in that way, we're trying to find ways of partnering with communities, allocating resources to communities to help improve that like One Health perspective, where you're improving the environment and the animal and the human situation so that everybody thrives. And so for that reason, criminal justice is becoming more than just the legal system. It's really becoming this interdisciplinary field where we need to work with social workers, we need to work with mental health professionals, and not just in the legal system, but in areas where funding is allocated so that social health workers and mental health workers can actually identify problems that can either become preventative measures so that if cruelty isn't happening, but there may be underlying issues that could contribute to that, you're preempting those issues. Or if cruelty has occurred, whether it's to humans or animals, they have the resources because they're interacting with them for a non-legal reason to perhaps address those points. And another point also, and this kind of focuses within my trauma-informed work, is that a lot of the reasons why people commit cruelty are not just because people wake up one day saying that it sounds like a great idea. There's usually a chain that's occurred that's caused it, whether it's been maltreatment as a child or vicarious trauma, watching something happen either to an animal or a person, or a car accident, anything that could create trauma. And so when people go to ask for help for mental health issues like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, a lot of these psychological issues actually stem from trauma or PTSD. And so when they go into evaluations, though, they're not always diagnosed with trauma or PTSD. They're just diagnosed with the symptomatic psychological issue. And so if we can work with our mental health experts and colleagues and identify the root causes that lead to these issues, which then lead to cruelty, it could also be a much cheaper way for us to identify some underlying causes, whether it's poverty or whether it's just like food deserts, and look at how we can help them in that way so that people don't encounter the legal system and then become more oppressed and more traumatized or more unable to be able to care for themselves or animals. And so in all of that, I think the legal system is the last step, but we really need to work with everybody involved to find all these different factors where that can be effective even when funding isn't available in courts. And it's just a really an all hands on deck situation where for people in my circumstances where I'm not specifically working for a court or a district, but I'm a third party advocate in different ways. You wind up becoming so much more than an attorney doing attorney work. It's everything from writing articles to community outreach and task forces and teaching and connecting people that are on hands and all like doing grassroots effort that are really there that you can support, but have the power to do the work. And so there's a lot of community engagement and you wind up being a coordinator for a lot of that stuff rather than just doing your typical like write a memo, submit a brief. We do submit a lot of amicus briefs, but I think in this current trajectory, I'm seeing, at least with people in my role, that what it means to be an attorney, that definition is changing. But I think it's one that's becoming, in some ways, it's more comprehensive. In other ways, you recognize your limitations, and so you're welcoming more of this interdisciplinary field. And I think that's where I'd like things to move more as well, with solutions-oriented perspectives, the way that Professor Ligman and Jake had mentioned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's helpful to kind of hear the different perspectives on how it stems from interpersonal issues to systemic legal issues to categorical exclusions in legislation, and how there's, different pieces of the puzzle that need to be addressed to kind of work towards the common goal that we have. So after asking you all to spend some time talking about, the issues and kind of the obstacles we want to get past, are there any recent, wins or legislative developments or news items that you found to be just kind of a reminder of what this is all about, and just I think a validating moment to say, what the work we're doing is important and we're making progress, and sometimes it's always fun to share those news updates.
I have one just because it happened yesterday. Through our work, we work with a lot of law enforcement and animal control officers and prosecutors, and hopefully more defense attorneys. And there's excuse me, one second. There are sometimes counties that we come across that seem really problematic. Or they seem like they're just unwilling to work with you. And we had a Washington statewide training yesterday with many ACOs and PD and prosecutors coming, and there were some people who represented the state and also a county in particular that was really challenging to work with. And hearing everybody's approach of the desire to be comprehensive, the desire to implement restorative justice measures and transformative justice measures and do things that are really more wholesome and not retributive, and thoughtful of the people that are all involved. It wound up being a win because you sometimes just send so many emails into a void, or you speak on things and don't get a response. But getting to meet people in person and know that you guys are really coming from the same place is very heartwarming, especially in animal law, because I think sometimes advocates and organizations can seem like, well, we are trying to do the same thing but different approaches, or you guys aren't doing it right and we're better or whatever. And it's really not the case. We're all finding different pathways and facets to getting to the same point. And so I think, at least for animal law, every time you get to meet people and know that you can collaborate and it doesn't have to be adversarial, that's a win. And yesterday was a win for that reason. And I think anything to promote that is really powerful, especially within animal law.
It's a little difficult for me to talk about specific wins. Being an active prosecutor, I'm pretty limited in what I can say as to my cases. I will say that we're in the middle of a legislative session right now, and there are 2 or 3 bills currently pending. We're putting my efforts behind one in particular that stands to really clarify animal cruelty offenses in, I think, a really helpful way, and it will also hopefully move towards a better understanding of the collateral consequence of possession of animals post conviction. Those are my big bright spots now. They haven't quite happened, but they're on their way. And then I know that there's also another bill to end off-track betting on greyhound racing in Oregon. We don't have greyhound racing. I think that only one state does, but we still have off-track betting that puts money into that system. So I think there's a bill pending to end that. And then finally, we have a state version of the federal Animal Crush video ban working its way through the legislature as well. So sorry I couldn't answer your question with anything recent that's good. I guess the Oregon developments for me is good that it was named #1, but those are some bright spots that I'm looking forward to in the near future.
I'll be even less specific, significantly less specific, I think. But I had actually just thought about this yesterday, so maybe it's pertinent, and I do think it's an uplifting sign. So something I remind people when I speak of my tenure in the Bronx, or when I tell my students in my course at GW, is probably 98% of the cases that I handled were cat and dog cases. Probably 95% of those were dogs, right? And I have a bias in favor of dogs, so I understand where that comes from. And obviously a lot of people have dogs, so a lot of people can relate to that. But I think obviously cruelty as it happens to any kind of animal is important. And while I think the sentencing, I think sentencing can be far too lenient in cases involving dogs as well, but it's certainly better in dog cases than it is in cases involving farmed animals or hunting violations. I think it's kind of impressive in a sense that for a criminal justice system that neglects to consider the severity of animal cruelty offenses so often, and in particular certain regions where this might be something might be of particular cultural significance, like hunting in particular areas, or of industrial significance, like farming areas. The fact that you have laws at all that cover some of these offenses, and the fact that you have prosecutions that arise out of these offenses, even if the sentencing isn't what I would want to see, and even if I have a number of issues with sort of what the statutorily prescribed sentencing could be, I think it's impressive, for example, to give one specific example, that you see with some degree of frequency hunting violation cases where the fairness of the hunting is called into question. So something like baiting animals, there are specific laws in a lot of jurisdictions as to baiting animals. The fact that you're even getting prosecutions out of that and convictions out of that at all, I think, is a positive sign.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of good to hear that we hired an example from, a policy perspective, a prosecutorial perspective, and a legislative perspective. So it's good to see those developments in all aspects of law. I do have a couple more questions, but I do want to open it up to the rest of our students and our Dean of Animal Law in attendance today and see if they have anything else. And if not, I'll be mindful of time and just ask one more.
Well, no, I guess the one question that I would have would be, do you have any advice for the students about how to both be open and flexible to how their journey may unfold, as well at the same time as through making choices to prepare themselves for work protecting animals?
I can offer one perspective. I think that sometimes people can come into law school with this idea of either wanting to pursue animal law or viewing animal law as going, to an animal organization, for example. And that's obviously one path, and it's a path that people should pursue. And it's great that people like Professor Chapman have pursued that path. And obviously those organizations need lawyers and they do important work. But animal law has a ton of crossover with all areas of law. I went to law school for the purpose of being a prosecutor and not solely for the purpose of prosecuting animal cruelty offenses, but also doing that. And that worked out exactly as I had envisioned. And I'm not saying everything you plan in law school will work out exactly as you envision. And plenty of my expectations were not met. But I think the important thing to consider is that you can have other interests and other legal interests. And a lot of times it's figuring out, how do I pursue my advocacy on behalf of animals through another interest rather than just pursuing the animal interest exclusively, which I think does two things. I think it does a multitude of things, but the two things that I would want to highlight are, one, you might be bringing animal advocacies to a field where it might be lacking. So I found when I came to the Bronx DA that they were prosecuting animal cruelty cases, but they weren't being dealt with even on the prosecution side with the seriousness that I thought those cases warranted. So you can be a voice for animals through an area where that voice might be lacking. And the second thing is that there are a limited number of jobs in animal-specific related employers, as there are a limited number of jobs in anything in law. But obviously, a specific focus within the nonprofit sector is an even smaller focus. So this allows you to, one, get creative with your opportunities, but two, not necessarily narrow yourself and possibly, hopefully not, but possibly shut off other potential career paths.
I deeply, deeply echo what Professor Leugman said. And that was something that I wish I had known or had permission to experience when I was in law school. It's not that I was in law school too far long ago, but it's been enough years at least that I think the movement, it definitely changes rapidly. And what I've seen is that sometimes you actually have more effect being an attorney advocating for animals in an organization that is not focused on animals than you do actually being in an animal advocacy organization. For instance, ALDF is I'm very fortunate that ALDF has programs that are specific to different types of law, and PETA is like that as well. So is the Center for Biological Diversity. There's many organizations, but there are all of these organizations also, like Best Friends is a great example, where they are focused on animals, but the type of law that they're focusing on is not necessarily animal law. They'll need like a general counsel that focuses on contracts and administrative work. And so sometimes you'll find yourself looking at organizations you want to work for, but they don't actually have openings because the type of law they need is not focused on animals. They do grassroots animal advocacy. And so a way to really come into your own is doing exactly what Professor Leugman did and what Jake has done, where you've created a niche for yourself. You're willing to take on these cases and this focus. And then you kind of become the animal law expert, but in a place where it didn't exist before and nobody else was willing to do it because it wasn't prioritized, because it was understaffed. And so if you can find yourself in like as defense counsel or a prosecutor's office or a DA's office where you become that animal expert, you've just created like so much job security. And in some ways you may even have more animal law experience in that realm than somebody who works at an actual official animal advocacy organization. And I think that is a really amazing path that is it's underutilized to its fullest. And so whenever I hear people saying that they have to work at ALDF or, any organization, I really encourage them to look at other options too, because you never know what the universe is going to guide you towards. And sometimes the very unexpected is exactly what fits your interest and expertise. And honestly, if I wasn't at ALDF, I would probably join a county prosecutor's office and continue doing work that way, or become a defense attorney, but looking at like rehabilitative measures, because I love the job that I do at ALDF, but I've also been able to create it myself, and really create my own. But to really do like on the ground work within criminal law, you wind up having to be in an organization that doesn't actually focus on animal law. So CJP is very unique in that way, but there are just so many options. You can make animal law exactly what you want, and not going the typical route.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Kathy. I'm going to have to forgive you for decamping from Portland to go to the East Coast, but I do echo what my co-panelists said. The only thing that I'm going to add is that I found my career through the actual legal work that I did in law school. And I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers, but the third year of law school is a time when you should not be sitting in a classroom. It's a time when you should be doing clinics, externships, volunteering, working with actual clients and attorneys to see how these different parts of the puzzle fit for you. Because even if you have this passion, if you don't find the way that the law actually fits to your personality and your style, you are going to have a bad time. And when you're in law school is a perfect time to do that learning about yourself. Then the other thing that I would say is once you actually get out into practice, let's say you're not exactly where you want to be in terms of working for animal law related interests. There are so many agencies out there that do work related to animals that need legal advice and can't afford it. They would be in real trouble if something happened. So I would look for opportunities to bulk up your pro bono hours, working for the local animal shelter. They've taken in an animal and it's been a year and the county prosecutor is not moving on charges, and they need to figure out what to do with this animal, because we have that thing in our system where animals are both sentient beings capable of experiencing pain, fear, and suffering, and their property. So the property rights that a person has in this animal are not extinguished by virtue of the fact that law enforcement seized their animal and gave it to the animal shelter. And in a lot of jurisdictions, animal shelters are not part of the government. They are nonprofit agencies that are working, on very, very thin margins to provide a service that really, ideally, the government should be providing. So to the degree that you can find those opportunities to provide low-cost legal assistance or even pro bono legal assistance, I would say that that's a good way to get your foot in the door and to establish the kind of expertise that Jessica was talking about.
That is all really helpful advice. And Dean Hessler, that was going to be my next question. So very, very well done on that. I know we're coming up on time, so I just want to be mindful of, everyone's time. If there's anything else you wanted to talk about or touch on today and you didn't get a chance to, please, go for it. But if not, thank you again for your time and your support of the animals and supporting this legal field. We're all students kind of trying to find our way in how animal law fits in our career path. So I'm sure we'll be reaching out for more advice at some point, but thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say, if anybody watches this either now or later on and wants to get in touch, my email address is long and convoluted, but easily located on osbar.org if you just search my last name. And I would be happy to take time to talk either virtually or in person if you happen to be in Portland about those issues.
Same, and you can share my email. The other thing that I would just add to is that sometimes a lot of social justice movements, particularly animal law, get siloed. And so it's really important to read and be aware of a lot of things happening that are outside of animal law, so that you can bring that information and those resources and that wisdom to animal law. A lot of the things that we're experiencing right now, other people have gone through because of different types of oppression. Same oppression, same tools, different outcomes. and very different experiences for those that are being oppressed. And so just being able to read about social justice movements, whether it's civil rights or LGBTQ, it's really powerful. And I think it's something that is also under tapped. And so being able to bring that knowledge and those new forms of innovation will also, I think, help people stand out for job opportunities, and also just new ideas to guide the systems in different ways.
So thank you for hosting this and putting this together. This was awesome. That's the first thing I'll say. My email is directly accessible conveniently on the GW website if you just go to my profile on there. So that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'm happy to speak with anyone over email or in person, or however you see fit. I'll add one other thing, since I think it was Professor Chapman who mentioned general counsel, but whoever it was, that reminded me that I neglected to mention my wife when we were asked the previous question, who pursued a regular, so she was president of SALDIF when we were both in law school. We met through that channel, but she did not pursue an animal related legal career. She went the regular private practice route, did a stint in government, pursued more private practice, and is now GC at an animal nonprofit. So the other thing that I want to stress is that your legal career, which hasn't even begun yet, is long. And so even if wherever you initially end up has nothing to do with animal work and you feel like there's no way to weave it in, or like your opportunities are limited, or the firm you go to doesn't want you doing pro bono work, or whatever it is, it doesn't mean you should ever stop thinking about pursuing animal advocacy through the law, and that you might come across an opportunity to do that in a way you never could have envisioned. So it's not your one-shot thing where you have to figure it all out in law school, or you have to do it in your first job, or you just give up on that opportunity. It can always come up later in your career.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is really fantastic. We'll definitely send the recording out to students who can attend today, and we'll forward your contact information. So thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I'm sure we'll all be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.